Good morning. Thank you for being with us today on Emergent Leadership. Today I'm talking to Steve Dralle. Steve, how are you this morning?
Doing good. How are you doing, Brett?
I'm well. Thank you for asking. So Steve is the South Region President for GMR Global Medical Response. And I'll let him tell you a little bit about his story, but we want to talk to you guys today, as we do, about leadership, kind of Steve's path. He's going to share with us his experiences, some lessons learned, and then we'll end our episode today with a bit of advice that you can walk away with, so you can get started on your leadership journey or continue down the path of your leadership journey a little bit stronger if you're listening to this episode. So, Steve, let's jump right in. So you are currently with AMR, but you've kind of an interesting story and how you got to where you are today. Do you mind telling us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Yeah. No, my journey has definitely been a torturous path. So actually, my first leadership job was at McDonald's. I started working at McDonald's as a job in high school, and I became a manager at McDonald's before I was even 18. And honestly, with the exception of my MBA, the best management training I've ever received was at McDonald's. They're like a machine. They know how to manage cost control and things like that. So even to this day, there's a lot of cost control metrics and things like that I learned at McDonald's of all places, right? So I think that's sort of my main thing about leadership is that the lessons are everywhere if you open your eyes and pay attention. You don't have to get it all just from something industry specific. It's all over the place. I mean, I use a lot of stuff that I got when I was working at McDonald's and even simple things. There's so many experiences I had there that I still use today that are very important in how I interact with my teams and how I work with people. But going from McDonald's, I joined the military. I spent 12 years in the Army National Guard. As a medic, I was enlisted. I was not an officer, so I got to experience it from the enlisted side, which is a very different experience than an officer side. I worked on the streets as a medic for many years. I became a medic in '92, so probably for some of the listeners in EMS now, it was before they were born, which is a little freaking me out now. And then I worked up my way up to management in EMS, mostly through the clinical side. So I was on the clinical and QA and education side for years. I didn't think I was going into operations until I got into it, and I switched over to operations at AMR. Then I realized I really didn't have the tools, right? I didn't know how to read financials very well. I didn't know how to do some of those things. So I started on my MBA after I'd finished my bachelor's degree in history of all topics, right? It wasn't in business,
right?
Which has served me well, actually, because history is actually quite a good degree for this. But that's another story. But
we will definitely have a podcast around the history of.
Yeah, so that's a I could talk for hours on that one. But I decided I really needed to diversify, right? I didn't want to be that medic, that person that climbed the ladder just because I was a medic, right? I wanted to climb the ladder because I was a good business person.
Sure.
So I transitioned to work at VitaCare, maker of the EasyIO, and I started out as the product manager for the EasyIO, and then got my MBA, and then ended up being their VP over marketing for global marketing for all their products. They had some cancer products too, most people aren't familiar with, until it was bought by Teleflex. And actually a little bit before they were bought by Teleflex, but ultimately they were acquired. So I got to do global marketing. I traveled around the world doing labs and things like that. So I got a lot of different experience on the marketing side before I came back to EMS. And I really wanted to come back to EMS because I missed the clinical delivery side, missed paramedics and EMS personnel. And now it's so much different. I mean, AMR is really not just AMR now. Global Medical Response has air, ground, fire.
Yeah.
It's a very different company than what I left. And so I'm thoroughly enjoying that aspect of it. And we, getting to be engaged in the actual delivery of care and the development of care models and systems to provide services to communities is using all those business skills I learned in marketing and school that, I wouldn't have had otherwise. So it's definitely been an interesting path to get back to.
Yeah, sure is. Well, thanks for sharing. So you hit on a couple things that I think are really important. One, kind of what draws you to, emergency medical services, healthcare in general, is fascinating. But, I want to talk specifically about kind of like the things that you learned. So you mentioned that, out the beginning of our conversation, that the things that you learned were really more operational from McDonald's. I bet a lot of people are surprised by that. But I guess on the other hand, maybe not so surprised by that. So I think it's an interesting thing, and you've been through different organizations, and I know you've worked in, smaller markets, and now of course are responsible for, how many states are you responsible for now, Steve?
I think 8. Yeah, it's like from Texas up to Nebraska, over to Wyoming, back down to Nevada, back to Texas. So that whole little southern, south central area of the U.S.
So I think going from, kind of a smaller, you have a smaller purview of responsibilities of humans, because that's my, my passion, and I think yours too. And then managing, how many direct reports you have now, I'm sure, hundreds, but is there a difference in your mind in how to manage kind of that smaller operation, that smaller, more intimate group, with having direct reports of your direct reports? How does that feel different to you, or does it?
It does. And actually, there's a great book that I really encourage people to look at. Is General Mattis's book, Call Sign Chaos. He touches on that a little bit, because and it's along the same experiences that he describes in his book. So when I was a manager at McDonald's, I was a shift manager. I had 12 people working for me at that time, right? It was it's just, sometimes as little as 3, depending on what shift I was on. And so it was easy to have a very close and direct relationship. And it's much like a supervisor on an ambulance, right? Intimately everything about the people you're working with.
Sure.
Today I have a little over 9,000 employees directly under me, right? So I don't have an intimate relationship with every one of them.
Right.
And the reality is they don't have an intimate relationship with me. And so what you have to do is work through your direct reports to build that culture going through the organization. So it becomes much more important who you choose to represent you in the organization, how you push that culture and interaction, and then how often do you get out and interact with those people to make sure you're not sitting in your ivory tower and not engaging and actually getting out. Like yesterday morning, I was riding out with a crew here in Las Vegas, and we did like 5 calls. It wasn't anything big. They did a lot more than they do on a normal basis. And it really wasn't about the ambulance calls. It was just spending a little bit of time with field personnel, just to talk about it. Not even about anything important, right? It's just hearing what their life is like right now, and making that connection, even if it's just one person at a time. Just one helps me because it reminds me why I got in this thing in the first place.
Right.
And reconnects me with what I'm supposed to be doing.
Sure.
And 2, it reminds them that, hey, the guy sitting in the top sending out memos is actually a human being. Right. And, I can interact with this guy, right? Sure. So that kind of connection is important.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 pieces of that. You said you think it's not a big deal. I'm sure for those guys, it was the biggest deal, right? So
it was fun,
I think being humble is a super valuable trait. In humility is what gets you to where you're going, is recognizing that. So I recognize and appreciate that and see that in you. But I also know that my experience, one of my most powerful mentor experiences, was my first leader, actually also, was a leader formerly, not anymore, but with AMR, who was a GM in a market. And in my first role out of college, and, I had my little account executive job, and I don't know that I'd say a fondest memory, but one of the most powerful experiences that I had in the realm of leadership was that he would walk into my office, because I'd start my day a little later and stay longer because I was living in South Florida, and traffic patterns, it's like Houston or Atlanta or any of those cities. Doesn't make sense. So you can leave at 5 and get home at 7, or you can leave at 6:30 and get home at 7, right? Right. So that was the choice I made. And but he would walk into my office and ask permission to sit down, and sat himself in the chair across from me and just asked me how I'm doing. And it was not an intentional, not a super intentional thing for him to say, I'm going to walk into Brett's office and find out, what's going wrong with this account or what's working well with this. It was just a catch up. And that was so valuable for me. And I'm sure in that he got some insight as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's the key is relating to your employees and getting to know them is so critical. One of my most valuable lessons, and it's stuck with me forever, when I was working at McDonald's, is I worked in a part of town that was really rough. This is a part of town that even in the 80s, people were working at McDonald's to pay their bills. I mean, they had kids. This was not a summer job for them. This was their income, right? This was a very rough part of town. Socially, demographic was very different than what you normally picture in mainstream America. And so there was a big gulf between the managers and the employees. There was always a lot of tension. And we got a new store manager, and her mindset was, look, we should be treating the employees with the same respect they expect us to have, right?
Absolutely.
And so she said as a policy for all of us that we can't ask employees to do anything without please or thank you. And we address every employee with sir or ma'am, right? And no matter what, it doesn't matter what we're doing, who they are, what their position is, that's the way you address them. And it wasn't an announcement. There was no big, production. It's the politeness movement. It was none of that crap, right? It was just straight up, just start doing this, right?
Right.
And it was almost miraculous, the change in that store.
Right.
The attitude of everybody improved. And more importantly, the most important lesson I got from that was not only did the employees feel better, turnover improved, the interaction between management and employees got better, but more importantly, even the way the employees treated the customers improved, because suddenly the employees had value and they felt valued, and so they valued the customers all the time.
Yeah.
So that has always stuck with me, and it's something I always remind my supervisors is that the way our field personnel are going to treat their patients and customers is exactly the way that you treated them before they walked out the door.
Absolutely.
So if you were a jerk to them, you were screaming at them, going, get out the door, you're wasting my time. That is exactly how they're going to talk to your nurse, doctor, patient, firefighter, whatever. That's how they're going to act. And you've got to stop talking like that and acting like that. They're not somebody that's wasting your time. If your mindset is, you're wasting my time because you want me to solve your problem, then should not be a supervisor. That is what your job is to solve their problems.
And I think it's so important. You mentioned this earlier, that your mid-level managers, your regional leaders, even down to the front lines, they represent you. So for you, it's personal. And and I think that's an important quality in a leader, right? As we think about, how do you reflect and how do you want to bring that energy? And I'm going to go a little, hippie mode on us for a minute, and then I want to touch on something you said. Sir and ma'am is definitely a regional thing. So I think that's also maybe a podcast for another time, but
right. Well, this was South Texas, so yes, it was sir and ma'am was regional, right? Right.
But also, in that, like, I grew up in the South too, and I call 4-year-olds sir, right? So it's not an age thing. I
call my daughters sir or ma'am, right? And I say yes, ma'am to my daughter, right? I mean, so this is just a regional thing, right?
Right. But for context, obviously, what you're landing in is that it's a term of respect. So whether that term of respect is sir or ma'am or please or thank you, as you alluded to, or just taking the time to shake someone's hand or look someone in the eyes, or whatever that looks like in your region, in your market, and your part of the world. If you're in a different, across the pond, it looks different, right? And so I think just learning the culture of what's going to resonate is super powerful. And you're talking about a certain part of town or a certain organization, and what works for you, what worked at VitaCare may not work at GMR. What works for ground ambulance may not work in the air ambulance culture.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so important that we discern who our audience is and what that target market really is, and then what's the goal. And once you determine the goal, I think to your point, energy is so contagious. And whether that's for the positive or the negative, what you're saying and the words that you use with your representatives, if you will, are how they're going to treat your clients. And so I think it's great to hear you say that you recognize that energy transfer, because it's there. And so whether people understand that or really hear that, they feel it. And important not to be lost as a leader. So I love to hear you say that.
No, absolutely. I agree completely with that. I think the way we interact with people and that feeling is catching, so to speak, to tie into a pandemic right now. I think that the challenge is the negative spreads faster, right?
Yes.
And so it's easier. I mean, you can have everything working great and you have one bad person, and that is much worse than anything else, right? So that's the hard part, is you've got to be aggressive and looking for that person who is spoiling that mindset of and treating people poorly. And you've got to root that stuff out. And it doesn't mean, when I say root it out, I'm not saying get rid of those people, but you've got to recalibrate their worldview. I mean, I think the challenge for our generation, and when I say our generation, I mean the working management today. I'm not talking about age generation as it's normally defined.
Sure.
But the people who are in leadership today, our leadership generation, we have a terrible burden. We have to be better leaders than we had. And that is a really hard thing to do. We have to be better than what we saw and better than what we experienced. I had some reprehensible management as I grew up in this industry. I had horrible leaders. I got asked terrible questions during my interviews. I got treated horribly by managers. And I got to rise above that and be better. I can't say, well, it happened to me, so I'm going to do it to somebody else, right? I can't be that kind of a leader because the world won't tolerate it, and nor should it. And the workforce won't tolerate it, nor should it, right? And just like what's happening in the broader sense of the world with all of the social uprising right now, the world is not going to tolerate what happened in the past any longer, and it shouldn't, right? And we as leaders in this world have to be bigger than that. And we have to say, we're not going to perpetuate what's happened in the past any longer. We're going to be the ones that make the change. And this is our World War II. This is our major milestone to say, we're going to literally make the world better, and not by kumbaya singing whatever. I'm not being pie in the sky. I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's actually going to be quite hard. And we're going to fail in some areas. But I think our primary job and the way we do this is in our individual spans of control is we address the things we control, and we make the things we can control right. You know, we address how we treat other human beings in my span of control and make that right. We address social inequalities, racism, things like that in our span of control, and we make that right in my individual area. And maybe there's 1,000 of us that do that. That's 1,000 islands of right. And if we get enough people to do that, we can start to make some serious change. But if we all sit around and say, well, I only influence a small thing, I can't really change it, then nothing's going to happen, right? So I think each of us have to take that courage to say, I'm going to fix it with what I control. And that's where I think we have to be as leaders today.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think, you're spot on. I think Darren Greatly is one of my favorite. Brene Brown, she's great. She has a lot of leadership stuff. And
she's phenomenal. Yeah, you definitely should listen to Brene Brown. And before your listeners, they should totally look her up on TED Talks and on YouTube. She's phenomenal.
Yes. Yeah, she has good energy too. But one of the books, I started with Darren Greatly, and I read it when I was, still in kind of the corporate America phase. And things people may not know about me, I actually spent a stint working for Starbucks, not so long ago, and one of the leaders in Starbucks. And I have to say, Steve, I use the word leader very intentionally, because being a manager doesn't make you a leader.
No.
So when I'm hearing you say, hey, we got to, our leaders have to do this, and I think those leaders will always do those things because they're leaders, right? And clearly, if you were in a leadership position at 17, I have a similar story, right? I was opening a gym and had full, key responsibility at 15, And so I think when you have that in you, you've always had it in you. But you can also find that, right? And there's something that little thing, and being a leader doesn't mean manager. I think that your point is, you've got to find those people that are already leaders within your industry, within your agency, within your department or division, or whatever your sector is, and develop them and help them and coach them and guide them into those things, right? How do you lead by example? How do you make sure that you're using the right words to help people, motivate them? How do you rather than that kind of old school mentality of weeding people out because they're not a good leader, how do you coach them, develop them into something better? Because what I know is some of the best leaders are the ones that have those stories, right? Those breakthrough moments where somebody took the time to sit down and say, this isn't working. This is your career path. Here's where this is leading if things don't change. Or here's what I see. And sometimes I think that lack of self-awareness is that missing link. Sometimes people don't even realize the words they're using, the things they're saying, the way they're going about something. Sometimes it's a lack of even a self-awareness. So being able to have those tough conversations is not just crucial to being a leader, but to developing leaders.
No, I agree 100% with that. And I think they're two different skills. I agree with you completely there. Leadership and management are two skills. And in fact, for the nerds out there who listen to this, they'll know who Peter Drucker is. He's sort of like the father of American management, right? He wrote the book On Management, really phenomenal book. But he used to say that, management is doing things right. Leadership is doing the right things, right? And I think that's a really great way to think about management and leadership. There are people who are visionary leaders who can't get anything done because they don't know how to manage, right? And there are managers who are amazing at getting stuff done but have zero vision, right? There are needs for both, though, right? I mean, management isn't bad, right? I think the catch is you got to get stuff done, right? I mean, we would have never landed on the moon without good managers, right? Because it took a lot of work, right? D-Day wouldn't have happened without good managers, right?
Right.
And so I think the reality is those are two different skill sets. And once you identify them as skill sets, then you can master them both. But and it's important to master them both, but they're different skill sets. And learning them both are important because it makes you more effective, right? I can be a good visionary leader, but if I don't know how to manage, I'm never going to achieve my objective, right? But if I learn how to manage and learn how to lead, then I can be more effective and I can actually achieve those big goals, right? And so I think Peter Drucker's vision of them being two different things are really important. And I think you're right in that respect, is that doing that. But I think that the challenge is we often characterize management as bad and leadership is good. And I think that's not necessarily true. I think management is good if it's done right, right? You can be evil with management, right? Don't get me wrong, but you can be evil with leadership too.
I was going to say you can be evil with anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some really bad, evil leaders too, right? Who've led us in really horrible places, right? So
of course, who were great leaders.
Who were great leaders, no question, but they were evil great leaders, right? And I think that's the danger of all of these. These are powers no different than nuclear weapons, right? Nuclear energy can be a wonderful tool or a horrible tool. It's how it's utilized and what it's utilized for that makes it bad. And I think the same thing with leadership, but that goes back to my thought, and you talked about the tidbit, and it's probably premature on that, but that's my main thinking on this, is that these are skills. These aren't things you're born with. There are some people who have innate things. I mean, if you like Trevor Noah, he has a skit where he talks about in one of his comedy things about the voice, that some people just have it, right? And I ran into this commander at Nellis Air Force Base. He's one of those guys. And in the Army, we talk about this. There's some commanders that you charge a machine gun nest with. You don't know why. You just, and he said, let's go. You'd be like, yeah, let's do it. You don't know why. You're just like, I'm going to do it. I'll go with him. I don't care.
Right.
It seems like he's got it, right? And there's some people that have it, right? And I one time watched Colin Powell speak. And like halfway through the presentation, I'm thinking, I don't care what that guy said. I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. Come on, let's go, right? And he just has the charisma that makes you follow him. George Bush, even if you don't like him, I remember reading Maureen Dowd, who is no fan of George Bush. She's a columnist for New York Times, an ultra critic of George Bush. But in one of her columns, she even wrote, even when I'm around George Bush, I have to like him, right? I mean, he's just one of those people that has that charisma that you like him when you're near him. He's that person, right? So some people have that. But that's not leadership, that's charisma.
Right.
But I think leadership itself is a trait that is learned. It's something you can master. And I think if all your listeners understand that, then, and once you embrace that, then it's something you can master. Then you can let go of this idea that I'm born leader and all that junk. Get rid of that. Then you can start studying to be a leader and learning and looking for ways to do it. And once you accept that it's an art and a skill to master, then you can really become good. And all the ones you see out there that are phenomenal leaders, they weren't that way when they started. They developed that skill.
Right. I think Tony Robbins is a great example of that. And obviously, out of the industry, really more on the leadership side, but number one leadership training coach in the world, brings in, I think it's $6 billion in between 52 different companies that he runs. And you don't want to say self-made, but his story, are you familiar with his story by any chance?
No.
So he grew up in a home that, his kind of a broken home. And he started working at a young age to put food on the table because his mom, dad wasn't around and mom was struggling to feed the family. And so he started working and found a mentor who really valued leadership. And so his interest became, he made a commitment to himself. He was going to read 100 books in a year, something like that. And he read 700 books, and it was on, the biochemistry and the physiology of, emotions. And he read about all of these things. So he was truly a self-taught expert, as he just soaked up what everybody else said. And he spent a week's wages to go to a seminar to learn, from the best. And so I think investing in yourself is something that people forget to do, especially in EMS, is that, or I can say generally healthcare, is that caregiving is a beautiful quality. But I think at the heart of that, we have to not to forget to take care of ourselves. And in that, not just to say, oh, warm fuzzy, I'm going to go have a cocktail at the end of the day because I had a tough day. It's how do you really process through the emotions that come with that? And I think, Steve, we've talked about a lot of leadership philosophy and practices and things, but leadership is hard. And, I'm sure you can attest to this. When you go up against some of these things, it's very easy to say, hey, watch your tone, understand the words you use, engage with your people. But frankly, when you're on the road and you're working 12-hour days and everybody's coming to you saying, I need, it's difficult to take yourself out of that and say, hey, what can I do to support you?
Right.
So there's things that just kind of that awareness of, the challenges of leadership is what I really want to bring light to in these conversations, Steve, is that, there's a lot of warm fuzzy, right? I'm sure it probably feels nice to be president of a global company. And then there's a lot of great things that come with that. But there's also some real struggles and daily challenges that I'm sure you and not just people who run in global industries, but people that run 12 people at McDonald's, people that run a 4-person shift or run one station, that the challenge of leadership is that humans are dealing with humans,
right,
at the end of the day. So I asked this, I think you really appreciate your time today and connecting with us, and you shared it a little bit, but if there is one takeaway, what was that one takeaway that you think our leaders can move forward, go forth and prosper? This is what you got to do.
I think you hit on it. I think, excuse me. I think what you nailed on that last point on there is that leadership is a lifelong study. It is not easy. It is not for the faint of heart. I mean, throughout my career, I've always thought I want that next job where I'm going to get paid a lot of money to sit on my desk and have my feet up and be like, woohoo, this is awesome. And I've always found that every new job I get, the increase in benefits and pay is nowhere near the amount of work and responsibility that comes with it, right? And so I think there are negatives that go with it, but that's only if you don't look at it from the right perspective, right? And that's what studying leadership really brings you. So my mindset is to your audience and to those who want to bring into a career of leadership is the same passion you brought to learning how to read EKGs, to learning how to treat patients, you've got to bring to looking at how to be an effective leader and manager. And you've got to study it the same way. It is a science in of itself. It is a discipline in of itself. It's being an amazing paramedic will not make you a good leader. In fact, I could make a good argument that it makes you a bad leader, right? And so I would say look for ways to lead and study it, and also challenge yourself to listen to the side of you don't agree with, right? So if you feel very strongly, let's say you're a lifelong Democrat, go read stuff from the Republicans, and vice versa, right? Force yourself to consider the opposite view, because that's a critical skill set of a leader, is to be open-minded enough to consider things that you don't necessarily agree with. So that way you get the full picture and you understand the real nuances of what's going on, so you can make the right decision, not just the decision you like, right? Because it's not about what you like, it's about the right decision, right? And so you've got to do a lot of things to train your mind to think differently than the way you do on a normal basis, right? So it's all about training your brain. But studying and reading, I'm a huge reading fan. Audiobooks are also good. General Mattis said that, it says that unless you've read thousands of books, you're probably functionally illiterate. And I agree with him 100%. I have like 4 bookshelves at home, much to my wife's dismay, and I've read every book on them. I read a ton of books. Even the Marine Corps, I think, is a phenomenal example. As you can search online for the Commandant's reading list, and they have a reading list that's assigned to every rank in the Marine Corps, based on their rank and what they're expected to read to be prepared as leaders. So I think looking for those things to study leadership is critical. And those are the kind of things that I strongly recommend you do, is look for ways to develop your leadership skill set, your mindset and your worldview, to get a different perspective on life and to develop those skills. And if you disagree with a leadership philosophy, try it before you dismiss it and see if it really works.
Right. No, that's great advice. I think it's interesting. One last thing, because you just keep saying good things. You hit on the fact that, sometimes being a good paramedic makes it difficult to be a leader.
Right.
I think that's important. I think what I'm hearing you say, so correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's a different skill set. Like we were talking about
Very
before,
much.
being a manager and being a leader and being, they're different skill sets. So, I talk about it on a separate recording, but yeah, the challenge of being a leadership in EMS and being in leadership in EMS specifically is it's not black and white. And so as caregivers, as clinicians, you are literally life and death depends on you following directions, and black and white, no gray area. Right. And so those critical care paramedics and the nursing and some of the other, even if you look at physicians, to take it a step kind of educationally higher, formal education higher. If you're talking about an ER physician versus an oncologist, right, the way their brain thinks and processes and looks for problems, right, in an ER, they're trying to find something wrong. So it's a very critical thinking skill set that's developed that it really is an integral part of that job. I think what you were saying, Steve, was that your paramedics, your EMTs, they're very protocol driven, and it's you do this and then you get this outcome. And the challenge with leadership that you're saying, that I'm hearing and feel really passionately about, is it's not about, there's not one thing that's going to work. There's no, hey, I'm going to do this thing, and if I wake up every morning and I send good morning text messages to all my team, they're all going to respect me and want to have interpersonal relationships. It doesn't work that way. It might work for one person, so try it. But the 4 other didn't work for, the 10 other or whatever. You got to find the thing that works for them. And so leadership is just as personal as any interpersonal relationship, is that you've got to find out what works for you and that person. And the thing that works for me and Steve may not work for me and Bob. And so I have to adjust how I lead, how I communicate, interact with, based on what works for them. And there's a million personality profiles and things. So I think it's that level of self-awareness and those interpersonal relationships, how they resonate. And so really, leadership is a social experiment.
It is. And if I could add on that, the other problem that a medic has becoming a leader is that as a paramedic, all the knowledge you need is in your head, right, to make a decision. Everything's there. You've studied it all. You've memorized it all. It's all there. Sure. As a leader, almost never is all the information you need to answer a problem in your head, right? You almost always need to look for other sources, talk to other people, get other input. You need to collaborate. And very rarely, when I look at a problem, can I sit there and go, oh yeah, that's the answer. Here's the thing. And I mean, I've been in EMS and I've been in a leadership role for almost 30 something years, right? And I still talk to my finance guy. I talk to my HR person. I talk to my clinical educator. I talk to a lot of people before I make big decisions, right? Because I need their input. They're experts in their own area before I make a good decision. And sometimes their input doesn't change the way I'm thinking anyway, but it's critical I get that input, because I might make a bad decision without knowing their perspective, right? But as a medic, I would have never picked up the phone and just said, hey, so what are you thinking about this or that? I mean, I've got it in my head. I know what I'm doing. Come on, let's do it. I got to intubate this person, right? I don't have time to do that.
You call medical direction when something goes wrong, not to confirm that it's the right way. And so if you're waiting until...
Yeah, you even consider it. Calling for help is bad, right? Oh, you had to call med control? What's wrong with you, right? I mean, so you have to break that. Calling for help is, and we call it collaborating. They consider calling for help. It's like, you're not asking, you're collaborating. One of the biggest challenges I have with a new leader is getting them to even talk to me as their boss.
Sure.
It's like, almost always, if I have a new leader in a role, the area I end up having the most challenge with is communication, because they won't tell me stuff. And it's like, you've got to talk to me. You've got to keep me informed. You've got to interact with me.
Yeah.
Don't let me be surprised. There is no good surprises. Nothing's good. That's a surprise. Even good news is not a good news if it's a surprise, right?
Right.
And, but it's because this mindset that I've got to control it all. It's on, it's like, no, that's a paramedic in the back of a truck. A leader, a manager cannot control it all. It's too big. You've got to use other people.
Right.
And so that's a huge trait. But you're completely right in terms of the one solution fits all, the immediate feedback. That none of that's real in management and leadership, right? So those traits are things you have to beat out of your own head as you move into leadership.
Yeah. Well, you've hit the nail on the head. Obviously, it served you well. Again, being a lifelong learner, studying, reading, collaborating, those are all words that you may not hear in a management training, but I definitely think are worthy topics on a leadership training. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with me today, Steve, and challenging your people and challenging yourself to be a stronger leader. It's not impossible, right? People are doing it every day, and
absolutely.
I think the ultimate goal is to do a little bit better today than you did yesterday. And if that's one experience in one day and one tough conversation or one mistake at a time, that's how you get there.
Yeah, so. Actually, you hit something. One other thing, I know I'm dragging you out forever. You're going to get in trouble with your editors, but the reality is, the other thing is, don't be afraid of tough conversation. That's the other problem with EMS people. We talk tough, but we avoid the tough conversation.
Right.
I don't know how many people that I've had tough conversations with, and it's changed their life. And I'm not bragging, it's really made them a better person. I remember an FTO one time that I demoted, and he was stunned, and he was like, "Oh, I need to get back in your good graces." I'm like, dude, it's nothing about that. I think you're an awesome guy. I just think you're a terrible paramedic, right? And this is what's going on, right? And I described, categorically why I thought he was a bad paramedic, and it looked like I had slapped him in the face, right?
Right.
And it was
I'm sure it felt that way.
Right, and but nobody had ever told him that. And from that day forward, he became a phenomenal paramedic. But nobody had given him feedback. So in my opinion, every leader that man had before that had done him a disservice.
Had failed him.
They had failed him. He deserved that feedback. He deserved the honest, unfiltered feedback so he could be better. And he wanted to be better. He thought he was being good.
Right.
And so if you're a leader, you've got to have the courage to be honest to your team, even if it's hard. That's part of being a leader. If you can't be hard, if you can't do that, you shouldn't put on the leadership rank, right? And that's the most important skill set. Being honest with people about things, even when you don't want to do it, it's important. I mean, if you can't talk to somebody about their bad breath or body odor or their performance, you probably shouldn't become a supervisor, right?
Sure.
I mean, that's just part of the job. And that's, and it's it helps them. You don't understand. More than often than not, when I have given honest and direct feedback that's based on fact, I have had people come away from it positive. I rarely have had somebody had a negative experience from that. And I usually see their career turn around in a positive way.
Right.
Because they just haven't gotten that feedback before. People don't want to be crappy employees. They just don't. They want to be good. Right. They just need guidance.
Right. And that's fulfillment, right? So we show up and we bust our tails and we work 16-hour days or 24-hour days, and we compromise. I think that one of the things that with EMS is EMS people, military background, very comfortable with the idea of sacrifice. And as a word, but as a concept in life, is that we sacrifice our careers to take care of our families. We sacrifice our families to further our careers. We sacrifice our time to offer our energy. We sacrifice our energy because we offer our time, and finding those balances between those pieces that are all within us deep inside that make us the functional human that we are, or the dysfunctional human that we are, depending on the day, sometimes is really how we get to where we're going. And so that level of self-awareness, that interest, that curiosity, I'm hearing, Steve, is the biggest takeaway from your career. And I am so appreciative that you've taken the time to share with us.
I enjoyed it. Thank you. Sorry I drug you out so long.
You're fine. Don't apologize for that. Have a good day, Steve.